Welcome to Spinning Back Clique. Each week here at MMA Junkie, we take a spin through the biggest stories in MMA. And on today's episode, Nassourdine Imavov defeats Kyle Barallo in Viva la France. Is he next for Hamzat? Diego Lopez versus John Silva. Can Silva pick up his fellow nerds 1 week later in San Antonio? And Canelo Alvarez versus Terrence Crawford in 5.5 days. How pumped are you? Hello, everyone. Gorgeous George here on the con. And look at the distinguished panel we have for you today. Goes from MMA Junkie Radio. He's here in Las Vegas, the fight capital of the world. Danny Segura checks in from 305. He's one of the top reporters in the world. He's in Miami. Farah Hanoun is our international superstar. She checks in from Morocco. And Goes is going to double on the ones and twos. But before we get started, if you could kindly hit that like button, I would greatly appreciate it. So with the algorithm, so with the MMA Junkie Radio YouTube page, getting close to 420,000 followers, all because of you. Let's get going. Squad, another successful trip to France for the UFC. Can't say the same for the fighting nerds, but Danny, how impressed were you with that performance by Nassourdine Imavov? We'll start at the top. He's got to be the leader for the Hamzat Chimaev sweepstakes, no?
Yes, because he's got a fight in. And how impressed was I? I wasn't too impressed, let's just say. I don't think it was a bad performance either, but he didn't get a spectacular finish or anything like that. So I thought, all in all, it was a solid performance. I thought he had a tough fight in front of him, and he handled it well. And he looked good. If I had to give it a grade, I would give it a solid B.
All right. Let's move on to Goes. Goes, were you more impressed than Danny, or are you on the same wavelength?
I'm on the same wavelength as Danny. Now, I know that sounds crazy, but I think the whole night kind of spoiled us a little bit. Just all those finishes and all that. And then we get to that main event. And it was a masterclass, right? Like, the whole fight, he was just one step ahead, right? He was the first guy to everything. But I don't know. It lacked that finish, that oomph that you feel like when there's four guys battling for one spot, you want that stamp at the end. And we didn't get that. And so then you kind of look and you see, well, what's going on here? I mean, because he did kind of throw the kitchen sink at Barallo. And I don't know that we really look at Barallo and say, this is a guy that didn't deserve to be there or anything. I think he just ran into a freight train. But the only thing that was missing was just that last stamp, I think, that we needed on the night. We just didn't have it. But it was a very solid performance for Imavov. And it's pretty scary because I think he is one of those guys who obviously deserves to be here. But I do feel like he's showing that he's going to be continuing to improve.
All right. Father, you still got that drink that you had before the show in front of you? Okay, that's not the haterade that Danny and Goes are drinking, right? What did you think of the performance, man? I thought it was kind of impressive. Like, Barallo's, he's a good fighter, man, and he kind of made him look non-existent in there.
Yeah, I think they were being a little bit too harsh. Maybe I should hand them that drink, or Danny's already got it. Yeah, but no, I think they're being a little bit too harsh. Look, Barallo's never been finished in his career. He was, on a 17-fight win streak? And let's be real, every time that someone broke down this fight. First off, a lot of people were doubting Imavov, which I was pretty surprised by. If I'm not mistaken, he closes the betting underdog. And I saw a lot of people, whether staff picks or just people analyzing pundits, fighters, a lot of the fighters were picking Barallo as well. So Imavov was being kind of underestimated in this fight. And I think the way a lot of people broke this fight down was that it was going to go the distance. I think most people thought that, just stylistically looking at the way or the keys to victory that we would have thought for both guys. But no, I thought Imavov looked good. He was a step ahead. He looked like the faster fighter. Yeah, it was a bit of a feeling out process to start, which is, I think, like you guys said, there were so many finishes and it was such an exciting night. And then I think the first, minute and a half or two was just basically no action, feeling out process and whatnot. But obviously, Imavov knew that Barallo was probably going to try to get this fight to the ground at some point. He went 0-5 takedowns, right? That was the one perhaps chink in Imavov's armor or the question mark surrounding him. When we're talking about who's going to fight Hamzat Chimaev for the title, we talk about the ground. Yeah, he passed that test in terms of defending takedowns. I know Hamzat is not Barallo when it comes to the ground, but at least what we saw out of Imavov against Barallo was pretty good.
Yeah, it wasn't exciting. I get that. And the finishes leading up obviously served up the main event to hopefully give us something special. But man, when you make another top 5 fighter look frustrated, look like they don't belong in there, then I don't know. I guess I'm a little bit more on the B+, A- side. But yeah, I get it, guys. The finish wasn't there. I told Danny pre-show yesterday when we were prepping, I was like, yeah, looking back of the 4, Fluffy kind of made the statement, I guess, out of all of them. But he's already been booked against RDR, so just one of these two, I guess, needed to get out of there and hopefully be injury free. All right, so if he didn't seal it for you, did he seal the title shot for you, Danny, at least? I mean, even though you weren't as impressed, or do you think there's still an opening? Because, Hamzat, I don't think is fighting in October nor November. So the longer he's out, the more in play the other two are in.
He is the front runner for sure. Now we just have to wait and see what happens with Fluffy and RDR. I think if either of those guys do something spectacular, I do think they surpass Imavov. But again, we'll have to wait and see. I think Imavov made a solid case for himself. I think the French Parisian audience kind of helped him, boost his look as a star as well. And again, I scored the fight 50-45. I thought it was very, very impressive, but it's not a Lerone Murphy spinning back. Was it an elbow or a spinning back?
Elbow.
Spinning back elbow, knocking out Aaron Pico out cold, or even Khamzat Chimaev who entered title shot off destroying the jaw of a former champion. It just wasn't that. So that's why, again, I'm not hating. I thought it was good, but let's wait and see what happens with Fluffy and RDR.
Okay, another question would be, goes for you. Did Imavov show that he can even be a threat to Khamzat? Let's just say the UFC comes out and clears things up and says, hey, that guy's next. We're just got to set a date. Did he show that he's a threat to Khamzat after how impressive Khamzat was about a month ago?
I think there's a difference between being a threat and being a challenge. And I think he showed that he can be a challenge because he's no walk in the park. But was there one particular thing that he did that you say Khamzat hasn't seen that before? Probably not. I don't think so.
Okay. Fada, how about you? Who would, and we'll even take it a step further. Do you think he would compete and do well? And do you have an early lean on that fight?
Yeah, I'm going to go with Khamzat because I think for Khamzat, like Go said, it isn't really anything that he hasn't seen before. Obviously, Imavov was fast with his hands and he's got that, kind of karate stance with his striking. But I just feel that Khamzat can get anybody down to the ground. It's going to need some really, really dangerous jiu-jitsu to beat Khamzat, or at least have him hesitant to stay in top position like the way he did with DDP, because he just didn't feel any threat from Dricus. We saw against Gilbert Burns, he wasn't even willing to engage on the ground with him. So I think that's what it's going to take, and why a lot of people mention RDR, because out of all those guys, in terms of jiu-jitsu off of your back, many people think RDR is the guy to perhaps pose a little bit of a threat because he has a bit of an arsenal. But it all comes down. It's pretty simple with Khamzat. It all comes down to who can, because like I said, he answered all the cardio questions against Dricus, but it was one-way traffic. Like there was no resistance from Dricus on the ground whatsoever. So obviously if Dricus was stuffing some of those takedowns, maybe we would have seen naturally both guys tire out. But I think the person that's going to test Khamzat is not only someone who can stuff the takedowns, but really make him work when he's in top position. And I just don't know if Imavov is that guy.
All right. If we put on our conspiracy hat, Danny, I don't like to do this too often, but in a way, maybe somebody not looking competitive towards Khamzat doesn't upset the UFC. Maybe the UFC's found themselves a star that they want to keep around for a while. Do you think that exists, that train of thought?
Actually, I hadn't thought about it until you mentioned it, but it makes total sense. We know the UFC sometimes does that. Obviously, the best end up fighting the best, but we have seen some fighters kind of being, a little bit more set up to favorable matchups over time.
Just O'Malley and Vera. Vera was his first title.
That is a great example. When we knew Merabdo Alashvili at the time was the guy to be challenging, but yet they made the Vera fight. I honestly wouldn't be surprised if Fluffy or RDR go out there and look like killers. I do think the UFC has a tough decision to make because Khamzat is a star. So I'd still like to think that at the end of the day, they will respect sort of the sport and will give fans what they want, which will be the toughest fight for Khamzat, as they should. But I don't think you're crazy for thinking that.
Bada, you look like you want to jump in.
Yeah, because I like when we're talking about the star thing, because this was something that Joe Rogan was talking about on his fight companion. They brought up Sean Strickland, who's coming off of a loss and hasn't fought since February. But they're talking about, like, if we're talking about the biggest stars at middleweight, it's Sean Strickland, Paulo Costa, right? Like the people that have the beef with Hamzat. But I think it would be a little bit absurd if either one of them got a title fight. But we've seen crazier things, right? But I think in terms of RDR, Fluffy, and Imavov, I think they're all on the same level in terms of stardom or hype or following or whatever. They all have kind of, Fluffy has that cult following, and then you've got RDR with his home country, and you've got Imavov with France and Russia. But I think if you're Paulo Costa or you're Sean Strickland, get a fight booked real quick. I know there are rumors of Costa and Shara Bullet. I don't know if beating Shara Bullet is it, but I think one of those guys just needs to get booked. Sean can't, right? Sean Strickland, because he's got the suspension. But if you're Paulo Costa, jump right in there, get another win. That'll be the best thing you could do.
Did Rogan sound like he wants it, or he's just heard that it could happen? Or did he sound like he supported it at all?
No, they were just talking about it, and like he was like, weighing the options stuff. So it's not like he flat out said he should be next. Brendan Shaw brought it up, and they were like, like you guys said, we've seen crazier things.
Yeah. I mean, I love heat. Don't get me wrong. And Costa and Strickland are good at stirring it up. But man, like we've had this pairing of these four fighters that have been just doing really well over the years, and oh man, this one would be one of those that sucks if it got railroaded just because of that. Especially someone coming off a loss.
Yeah, my pick is Imavov. I think that's the guy. He's got the best resume, regardless of what RDR and Fluffy do. In my opinion, he's got the best resume. If we're going based off of merit, which I know isn't always the case, Imavov's the guy.
Goes, you want to weigh in before we turn to Morayo's future? What are your final thoughts on this? I guess did he seal it, and do you see the arguments for others? Or
look, on paper, yeah, I think he sealed it. I think it would probably be the right person to go to, but the UFC doesn't always play by those rules. And if RDR or Fluffy get a finish or look really good, depending on timing, the UFC can always manipulate things to make sense for them. So I wouldn't be shocked if somebody did that. But on paper, I do think it should be Imavov.
I think they're holding Hamzat to the Paramount era, just so everyone knows. That's what I think. I don't think he'll make it on the December card. And that does give Fluffy and RDR a chance to impress. I'm telling you, man, that Fluffy finish, right, with the leg kicks, the punches, and then that strangulation and the way he dropped it just looks so gangster out of all of them that another one of those against an RDR, I'd start getting nervous if I was Imavov. Now, if Hamzat somehow was already being penciled in for December, then I'd feel better if I'm Imavov, because Imavov does have a nice list cannon here. Izzy, right? And now this one. And I know there's another one I'm missing, but he's really got some decent names that I hadn't given them enough credit for until fight week when I started relooking at their resumes. But Morayo, Danny, next for Morayo, man. Again, let's remember what happened to Prachas. We started thinking about the fighting nerds. What's going on? I mean, they finally took their first L, and then he comes back strong, man. So I don't know if that's in that culture for the gym for the two fighters. We'll discuss the other one in a second. But what would you want to do next with Morayo?
I think he was on the money when he got on the mic in his post-fight interview, and shouts out to him, because I feel like fighters usually don't have as much clarity, immediately, literally seconds after a bout. But he mentioned something about having no adrenaline. And again, English is his second language, and he was kind of trying to find the right word. And he even said it's not motivation. He didn't really know what word to give it exactly, but we get it. He's lacking energy. He's lacking motivation. He's lacking that fire in him. And I agree with that. Like when he came in the UFC, he was just running through people, and there just looked like a certain determination about him that we haven't really seen in his recent bouts. It kind of looks like he's just coasting, and I know he's not, but again, that little extra is missing, which didn't allow him to really go for the finish in that fifth round, knowing that he was down on the cards. So whatever he needs to do, whether that's taking time off, whether that's getting a fight quick, whatever it is for him that can wake that up back inside him, I think that's what he needs to do, because right now he looks like a skilled fighter, but a fighter that perhaps doesn't really want it as much as he used to.
Can I say something crazy, guys? Look, the fighting nerds, for as successful as they are, what I personally think he needs is maybe just to get away. And I'm not saying for a whole camp, but
What?
a couple weeks and just get different looks and just be reinvigorated. I think something like that, or bringing a group of people into that camp, would probably help them all a little bit, just because they've been so successful, but they are kind of seeing the same looks over and over. And you got to figure this thing out because Danny's right. He looked a little flat, you know. Like I think I'm not saying move your whole camp. I'm not saying be gone for months. Just a couple weeks and just get a couple new looks.
Well, back to Strickland, but he brought up the 2 weight cuts in 3 weeks. Probably had a lot to do with this lack of adrenaline or motivation or whatever that he was trying to state.
Yeah, I think Kyle does a lot of media. He's heavily involved. Like he did a good job of building up the fight. I think that benefit Imavov at the end because it got a lot of people excited and talking about it. It got it personal. We've never really seen Imavov talk like that. Granted, it's through a translator, and I wish he'd learn English. But a lot of times I feel like these French fighters can speak a little bit. They just don't have the confidence. So I always used to think back to Francis Ngannou. Shout out to him because in the beginning when he used to do media in English, it was very, very limited, if you guys remember. But he was trying. It takes like one line, right? I think back to your question, about the weight cuts. Yeah, I mean, sure, but I just think his focus perhaps was on the wrong things. Imavov just seemed a lot more serious, whereas Borralho just gets involved in all the stuff online. Like you see him everywhere in every headline about every fighter, right? Like he's always just always out there, and I just feel like he could have probably focused in a little bit more, probably should have focused more on the wrestling, maybe send 2-3 years to Dagestan and forget, I don't know, but that was his path to victory against Imavov, and he wasn't able to get him down. So I think maybe he should have just focused a lot on his grappling in the training camp, or to try and get that emphatic win, especially that we all talk about grappling being the key against Hamzat, well, defensively in this case. But I just think his focus wasn't all too there.
So like an O'Malley / that type of unplug, like Brandon Moreno, just get away from social, get away from get better in the gym and forget about chiming in on the rest of the world and the world of MMA.
Yeah, maybe not to the extent of Sean O'Malley, like you don't have to completely like disconnect like that, but just kind of go away and just get away from all the distractions and all that stuff, because I just feel that he's just everywhere, right? So I just feel like he should probably like zone in a little bit more on the training. And I'm pretty sure he's going to do that after this fight.
Well, like I say, the fighting nerds do seem to bounce back, Danny.
He is the captain of the fighting nerds, and that's another thing, that they're always traveling for each other's fights, and that adds up, man. You see them, and he's everywhere, as Farah mentioned, and sometimes you got to pull back from that because that does take a lot of your energy.
Yeah. All right, the co-main event. Let's get to this a little quicker. My bad for dragging out the main event, but big names: Borralho, Imavov, a division that's popping. BSD versus Rufi. I mean, look, I don't know that there's much to say here, man. BSD, Danny, we talked about it. He looked good, on the feet or on the ground, and Rufi looked almost intimidated about half of where the fight can go, which is the ground.
Yeah, I was surprised, not by the outcome necessarily, because BSD does have good grappling and he does have a lot of submissions to his name. So I didn't think it'd be crazy for him to submit Rufi, but he just did it with a lot of ease. Like the way he just kind of advanced through some of those positions and just, the way he dominated Rufi. I think Rufi, even at some points when he decided to allow BSD to stand up when he was able to reverse some of those positions on the ground, he was taken down again, like immediately after. It was dominance from Benoit that I didn't expect. And yeah, I mean, talk about like trying to bounce back and put away behind that 2-fight streak where he lost by stoppages to Moicano and Poirier. Man, he's doing a great job at kind of recuperating and rebuilding his brand, because he had so much hype before those 2 fights, and those 2 fights took a ton of hype away from him, but he's doing a fantastic job in rebuilding himself. So shout out to Benoit Saint-Denis, who, in my opinion, is still a contender. He's still live and very much in play for a potential title run in the future.
What's next for BSD, Farah? What would you do with him?
I like the Mateo Scammer fight. I know he called for Arman as well, which I don't hate it. I never hate it when fighters like go big because he assumes that Arman's looking for a fight, right? So he's like, oh, I'll do it, you know. And BSD is an active guy. Like people forget this guy started MMA at 2019, and I have to put my hand up and apologize. You excuse Benoit. Like I doubted him. I wrote him off really quickly. I was looking at his fight with Kyle Prepelik and I was like, I didn't. Yeah, he won. He finished the fight, but I didn't love the way he looked in that fight, and I was doubting him a little bit. I said, Hoofy's a tricky striker. He's very dynamic. He can hit you. Like we saw him land that flying knee, right? Like he can do even in a fight that he got dominated in. He was able to land something like that. Granted, it wasn't like super clean, but yeah, I doubted him. How quickly we write guys off, right? Benoit was on the cusp of a title fight had he beat Dustin Poirier, a fight that he was doing well and a fight that he believes the staph infection really negatively impacted him. So, yeah, I mean, good for him. I doubted him, and he's a guy I followed pre-UFC, so I'm very surprised at myself for doubting him so quickly. But yeah, I like the Mateo Scamro fight. There's a little back and forth between the two of them, and I think it's a good it's a good fight for him to try to go back to the top of the rankings in terms of fighting the Dustin Poiriers and whatnot. I think a win over Mateo Scamro will get him there. So I like that fight.
All right. We'll get through these next 90 seconds, and then we're going to move on to boxing. I'm already seeing some people in the chat asking if we are going to talk boxing. We are, because one of the biggest fights of all time is going to take place here in Las Vegas in a stadium with two superstars, legends, future Hall of Famers. We'll be joined by boxing expert Alan Dawson in just a second goes. But something came up with Danny and I in the pre-fight. What we were hearing online was roofie fraud checked. That's a term that gets thrown out. What were your thoughts there? Is that too strong, or is there something to that?
I think it's a little too strong. He kind of ran into a freight train. Like Farah said, this is the BSD of old, what we all thought he could become. And I probably wouldn't say fraud check, but there's definitely some things he needs to get checked out. He needs to fix, but fraud check's a little strong.
Yeah, that's for sure. All right, give me another highlight, Danny, from UFC Fight Night in Paris. I think 11 finishes, KOs, and I think 1 or 2 subs, but very, very impressive run that they were on over there. Who shed some light on someone?
I'm gonna give a shout out to Ante Delija. This is a guy that I've covered for a bit since PFL has a lot of their shows down here in South Florida. So, I've covered some of his fights. He's a former PFL champion, 35 years old, almost like 40 fights, professional fights. 35. You would think that somebody at that stage in their career are pretty done. Yet he was able to make his UFC debut very late into his career. Was able to pick up a solid win. Knockout finish over a guy that's a veteran and very well respected in Marcin Tybura. And man, we just saw what that meant for him, right? You just felt like he probably felt, given the stage, that he was never going to fight for the UFC. And here he is making a big statement in his debut, and very much needed a result for the UFC heavyweight division. I think this guy, I'm not saying future champion or anything, but he picks up another knockout or two, and I think he can spice things up and make the division a bit more interesting.
And what's in the water in those gyms in Manchester now, man? A lot of fighters are migrating that way, coming out like beasts, including, of course, the champion himself, Tom Masvidal. But Bada, back to the question, another highlight from UFC Fight Night in Paris, France.
I'll give you 3 fighters and I'll make it quick. Kaue Fernandez, like holy crap, what a finish! And this is a guy when he was booked against Fares Ziam, I'm like, why? Like Fares, like a lot of people felt like Fares Ziam deserved a ranked contender. I'm like, this guy is a dangerous guy, and you have nothing to gain from that fight. So shout out to Kaue. I think he's looked very impressive so far in his UFC stint. Rinat Fakhretdinov, someone give him a step up in competition. What is he on, 100-fight win streak? And then Sam Patterson is a guy I followed when I used to watch fights at Brave Combat Federation. He's never a guy I circled. I circled Hamzat, I circled Ilya Topuria. He's never a guy I even circled as someone to look out for potentially in the UFC. So shout out to him. He's been taking guys out in the first round, so he's been killing it too.
All right, how about you guys?
I got to go Modestas Bukakas. I thought that if you look up and down his record, man, I mean, this kid's been doing pretty good, man. He's very charming. He's fun, a great interview. I think that was great. And I also want to shout out the Paris crowd. It's nonstop, man. They don't stop cheering for 1 second. I don't even know if they serve food, if there's bathroom breaks, but that place is full and they're just going crazy from start to finish.
They love their national anthem too. So if you missed it right when the event started, you got to hear it 10 more times. But it's a lovely national anthem, maybe the greatest one ever. Every time I hear it at the World Cup, it's pretty impressive. Listen, there's a lot of fights to give a lot of love to, so I'll just fill in. Sola, man, Axel Sola, not Alex. Axel Sola, Mason Jones, beautiful finishes. I agree, fight of those kicks by Fernandez. I mean, both legs were jacked up, so he was really, really bringing it from all angles. And then, you know what, man, our guy, Brad Tavares at Extreme Couture took a loss, but I got to tip my hat to that Polish fighter. Sharp hands, a lot of power. And guess what? When the tide was turning and Brad won round 2, and, you know, obviously there was recipe there, experience, cardio going into round 3. I mean, this guy just found ways to pin Brad down against the cage. And you could tell he's got some good power. If you look at his record too, his ratio is high. So, man, I hope Brad comes back, though, because he's one of my faves. He's been doing this for like 15 years, too. But, yeah, like Ghost said, man, Paris, you came strong. Respect to you guys. All right, so Fado will rejoin us a bit later in the show. We have to talk about UFC in San Antonio. But, hey, there's another big event taking place on the 13th, the same night as Noche in San Antonio. And, by the way, the times – you're not going to have any overlap. So you're all set, combat sports fans. You get to see your MMA and then, of course, boxing on Netflix. And joining to break this down is Alan Dawson. He's been on the show. He's our boxing expert. How are you, sir?
Yeah, I'm good. It's great to see you guys again, especially on a week like this where we're getting ready for, like you said earlier, like a real marquee tentpole event for Las Vegas. I can't wait to join you guys.
Is this goosebumps like you remember De La Hoya and Trinidad, or even Pacquiao and Floyd Mayweather? Is it like to that level of a super fight for you, Alan?
I think so, because there's a lot of things going on. One, Terence Crawford, I was ringside when he put that all-time great thrashing on Errol Spence in 2023. It was one of the best live performances I've seen in anything, entertainment, sports, boxing. I thought that was incredible. And that really solidified Crawford's status as a pound-for-pound fighter. And the guy that's been there for more than a decade as a pound-for-pound fighter is Canelo. There's a 14-pound weight differential between these guys. Recent history says this is too much for people to take. Kell Brook went up from welterweight to middleweight. He lost. Size proved decisive back then. Mikey Garcia, very talented fighter, went from lightweight to welterweight. Again, skills didn't overcome size. But the one time in history where it did matter was Henry Armstrong, a real historical outlier. That is what Terence Crawford can do. He can put himself up against, literally one of the reasons why we even talk about pound for pound, somebody who went from lightweight really heavy and kept on winning. So if Crawford does that, he is in the pantheon of all-time greats. I think he's already there because of what he did to Errol Spence. But it's tricky because Canelo is so accustomed to this weight. You throw two pound-for-pound guys together when they're in and around the same weight class, I think magic happens. But the one sprinkling the magic dust is Dana White. This is TKO's entry into boxing, and they're making a huge splash for me, not just because of the size of event, the broadcaster, Netflix, that's huge. The Allegiant Stadium, we've never had a fight event at the Allegiant. We've seen some great events all across the Las Vegas Strip. Last year, we saw a great one at UFC Noche in the Sphere. That was, one of a kind. We've seen MGM Grand has the boxing history. T-Mobile is now the home of the UFC. We see Michelob Ultra Arena. There's arenas throughout the Strip, but this is the first time in the Allegiant. I'm pumped. You can tell straight away. I've already had 2 coffees and I'm ready to go. This is a great fight week. I can't wait to get stuck in.
And don't forget the Thomas and Mack. They had some big fights where UNLV goes his alma mater, where they play hoops. And remember that old outdoor stadium where Fan Man arrived as well? Yes. So we've had some great arenas with a ton of history. Hey, what's Canelo like 10-0, 12-0 at 168? I mean, he's been pretty dominant sitting there at super lightweight. I don't need him to go any higher, and obviously he's already done very well, in the early stages of his career in the lighter weight classes. But man, he's money at 168.
Canelo, yeah, he's had some. I think he peaks really when he was literally breaking people's faces. What he did to Billy Joe Saunders was disgusting, and Billy Joe's not even fought ever since then. What Canelo did to Caleb Plant was disgusting. But the thing is, he hasn't been disgusting for a few years. He's been fighting the guys like Jaime Munguia, Edgar Berlanga. These aren't the quality of Crawford, really. What Crawford has been, the run he's been on has been awesome. He's actually older than Canelo, but I think he's less worn. Canelo's had more wars. I think that could come into play. If you actually speak to Canelo, he says he's actually had way more pro fights than what his record actually dictates, because he had some pro ones that weren't counted on his record in Mexico with, I think, Eddie Reynoso. They both say he's closer to 80 fights in the pro game. So whether that, timing is everything in combat sports. This is why matchmakers make their money. The timing could be right for a really big upset here where the skills do pay the bills and they overcome size. I think it's closer than a lot of people are saying. I think it's there for Crawford to really make a statement in this fight.
Boy, I didn't know you could count those unsanctioned bouts in Mexico. I've crossed over to Tijuana a few times. They didn't want none of this. All right, Danny, what do you have for Alan Dawson, our guest here on the MMA Junkie radio show?
So I want to ask you, how have you seen Canelo? Do you think he's past his prime? Because that's a lot of what I see in the chatter, and you kind of mentioned it. Yeah, his recent opponents, he hasn't looked great, and also his recent opponents haven't really been up to the level, right? Like a Berlanga is not super elite, but some would say that Canelo kind of just fights to the level of his competition, right? But what do you think from what you've seen? Do you think we're looking at a past prime Canelo?
I've been thinking that for a while, but maybe some of that is to do, like you say, one, with a level of opposition, and two, also because of how the footwork of these opponents. Nobody has the footwork of Terence Crawford, and whether that forces Canelo to raise his game, because he is under pressure here. He hasn't had a stoppage for a while. He has knocked down some of those opponents he's fought in 5 fights where, standards have been seen to be slipping, but he's just not been able to finish them. Whether he can put on the body shots early on Crawford and, take away some of that movement, that could be the route to his success. But, Crawford is a strong guy. He's actually had wrestling background. He can handle himself, at different ranges, especially on the inside. I just really don't want to bet against Crawford in this one. I think that it's there for him for taking. It's just whether Canelo has been hiding that facet of his game, and if he has, he's certainly fooled me.
Yeah. And with Canelo, like when this fight was kind of first being talked about and they would bring it up to him, he was very dismissive. He did not want any part of it. He was just like, what is, this guy's like so much smaller than me. Like he's just not even on the radar. Right. But here we are days away from the fight. It got made. Was it just a money thing, for him, that they offered him a lot of money and he ended up fighting? Was that part of maybe his denial, a negotiation tactic to get more money? Or what do you think changed in Canelo's mind for him to take this fight?
I think because of the level of opposition he's been taking, I think really there were only 2 options for him that would generate this type of money. And one is David Benavidez, and then 2 is Crawford. Benavidez is a completely different proposition to fight than Crawford. He's now bigger than Canelo. He's been fighting at 175. I'll just put it all out there. Benavidez, for me, is probably one of my favorite fighters to watch, up there with Alex Pereira in UFC. I think anytime these guys step into the combat arena, it's a spectacle, and they've got such a fan-friendly style. I've always thought Benavidez was the one to take, to kind of, I guess, retire Canelo and have that, the baton handed to the next generation. But Canelo's never really wanted to do that for Benavidez. He's always seemed, quite prickly whenever Benavidez's name has been mentioned. So when you have those 2 options, maybe they generate the same type of money, but the easier, quote unquote, easier fight is Crawford, just because, one guy's used to campaigning at 154 and 157, and then you have Benavidez who's, lit up 168, but never fought Canelo there. And now he's moved up to 175 and he's still he's still looking the goods in that division too. So I think when you have those 2 options presented to you, the one that kind of makes sense, if you want the biggest reward for the least kind of resistance, I think Crawford was the play for Canelo.
goes. I don't know. I have some other questions, but more bigger picture stuff. I don't know if you have any questions in
Yeah,
regards to the matchup.
Alan, so I wanted to get your take on something. I live 10 minutes from Allegiant Stadium. Okay, so I'm used to this being the fight capital of the world, the buzz that a major fight can bring. However, there's been a few times where I've had to see this happen in Saudi Arabia. You know, it's little by little, Las Vegas has lost a couple of the big fights. They're back. What is on the line for Las Vegas as a whole? And do you think Dana White and Turkey, have they done a good job of building this up in the city to kind of remind people that this is the fight capital of the world?
Yeah, I think great questions. I think to answer this, the buzz check, I feel like as soon as fights are on Netflix, it's a different kind of event. Netflix recently released a 2-part series that was very much like HBO and Showtime Sports, premium, shoulder programming. And I think that kind of is enough, because as soon as, whenever I'm flicking on Netflix now, that is where I'm seeing it. So the traditional outlets that we may see the buzz probably don't exist when you have a catchment of 100, 150, 200 million subscribers on Netflix that are seeing it on their homepage. I think that now is the promotion we're seeing when you have a broadcaster of that level. And I think possibly that might be enough. We saw it was enough for Jake Paul and Mike Tyson. Figures that, MVP shared a day after, 108 million people apparently watched at least 2 minutes of that event. I don't think the Katie Taylor all-female card, I don't think that did anywhere near that well. Otherwise, we would have seen the numbers. They weren't shared as far as I'm aware. But this obviously will fall somewhere in between, probably closer to Tyson and Jake Paul than Katie Taylor and Amanda Serrano. But yeah, I think the buzz will be there as soon as we start to see more of the fight week, and we see it more on Netflix on the homepage. But with the fights going to Saudi Arabia, I think those are kind of the more of the ones that have been that you would see in Europe. That like Tyson Fury and Alexander Usyk, Francis Ngannou against the British heavyweights when he went on his boxing swing. I don't think they were. If you remove Ngannou, he's definitely a Vegas fighter, but I think most of those other fights that have been taking place in Saudi, they seem to me to be more of ones that would be held in Europe rather than over here. I'm a little bit concerned when you see guys like Shakur Stevenson being linked with Saudi, and he, to me, is, if he's not already the future of present, he's certainly going to be the future of American boxing. We do need American stars, and we need them to be active in America. So if this is going to be a proof of concept for, American boxing and bringing, keeping these big fights in Vegas and, hopefully at least in America, I hope it's a slam dunk for everyone involved, because, I've moved to Las Vegas. I've been around Nevada for 4 years. I've loved, I really thought it was the fight capital of the world, but as soon as I moved here, I didn't realize how big the UFC was. Really, it's the, it's the UFC capital as well. It's the 800-pound gorilla. They've got 4, pay-per-views every year. Sometimes boxing can't match that. Sometimes it did. 2023 was a great year. We had 2 Canelo events in Vegas. We had Spence Crawford and we had Ryan Garcia and Gervonta Davis, which was the last fight to break the million pay-per-view barrier. Whether boxing can get back to those 2023 days. I thought 2023 at the time, I thought we could have done more. So, thinking we could go back to 2023 is low. We should be aiming for more. Yeah, I hope it's a big event for everyone involved, particularly because a healthy American boxing scene is healthy for the sport in general, for me.
I got one more and I'll turn it over to the guys. But for traditional boxing, right, this is as big as it gets. But you brought it up, the UFC, every weekend there's a fight card, right? And there's major pay-per-views throughout the year. There, you could even count WWE, right? I'm talking about just your general fan and their attention and how much they can take week by week. Now you got your BKFCs, your dirty boxing. I mean, there's a lot going on. And to me, traditional boxing is almost fighting itself in a sense, because now you have this new era of fan who only knows boxing as the stuff Jake Paul does and Misfits and all that, right? So how do you think this broadcast is going to kind of close the gap on everything, right? Make the traditional boxing fan happy, but also kind of maybe bring in some of that new fan, the younger crowd that's used to all this other stuff. I know we're on Netflix now, there's a different broadcast team, but do you expect anything else to be different about this?
I think that in terms of boxing, I think the sport has changed so much I don't think anyone's particularly to blame. People point fingers at like, let's say Jake Paul or Misfits. I actually think there's a place for this kind of, entertainment in the sport. All it does to me is add dates. I think I think it's actually the pro level of boxing that is letting itself down, because really we should be having more of these Canelo, Crawford type events. Canelo should have already fought Benavidez. Crawford should have fought maybe Jaron Ennis and Virgil Ortiz. There are so many why hasn't Tyson Fury fought Anthony Joshua? That fight could have been made, multiple times over the last 5 to 10 years. Why did Deontay Wilder never fight Anthony Joshua? There are so many what ifs in boxing where it keeps on shooting itself in the foot. And I think this has actually allowed Misfits to thrive, because they keep on making their events 3 to 4 times a year. It's allowed Jake Paul to keep doing what he does. I don't think those guys are to blame. They're providing like the entertainment side of the sport, and it's pro boxing that is letting itself down. I actually think we'll probably talk about this later in the show with Dana White coming in. I don't think there's a better time for TKO to come in when PBC, great promoter, but they're only doing 6 shows a year. It's nowhere near enough for the roster that they have. Top Rank hasn't had a broadcast partner now for 6 weeks, coming up almost to 2 months since their deal with ESPN expired. So when you've got 2 of the kind of old guard traditional powerhouses in American sport who are kind of like operating at maybe 10% of where they have been in previous years, is a really bad reflection for the sport and for American sport. But Golden Boy Promotions, I think, have been one of the most consistent with the quantity and the quality of the events that they're putting on in America, but they're just not breaking through. They kind of play second fiddle on DAZN to Matchroom. The sport, the pro side of the sport is in a weird place, because when you look at the marquee dates that we've got on the calendar, we've got Canelo Crawford, which is great, but it's actually being outnumbered by, the crossover type events like Jake Paul and Gervonta Davis and Mike Tyson and Floyd Mayweather, if that fight becomes a reality.
I have one question. I know you mentioned we'll talk about it later in the show, but no, let's talk about it right now. Dana White, he's obviously promoting this fight, but I'm curious, how much is he actually doing? Has he been promoting this properly, or is he just somebody with a big audience and can use the UFC machinery, which is all their social media accounts, in order to push this even further? Like, how much promotion is actually being done here by Dana White, and how would you review his promoting skills for this fight?
I mean, Dana White's got such a big platform and audience. Like you say, it's like, I think he does well with putting the right people around him, like Hunter Campbell at the UFC. The person he's got around him boxing that he's had around him for a while is Tom Loeffler at 360 Promotions, the main boxing outfit on UFC Fight Pass. And Tom's got some decent fighters. Historically, he's had great fighters. Kevin Kelly in the 1990s, he's had the Klitschko brothers, Gennady Golovkin. And now he's got 2 fighters that are actually on this bill as well, Sergey Borychuk and Callum Walsh. So I think, whenever you speak to Dana White over the last few years about what he's going to be doing in boxing, he's kind of pointed, to Tom. He's called Tom the best matchmaker in boxing. He's given him a lot of praise. So I think it's the people he's got around him in boxing and like Tom, who have been, doing the kind of matchmaking and the organization, and the promotion's kind of taken on a life of its own as a result.
I did want to get one in there, Danny, and then we'll go back to you. You brought up Callum Walsh's name. He's got one of the Vargas boys, Fernando Vargas Jr. This is the co-main event. Tell us about this one. Should this one be overlooked? Because obviously boxing's usually top heavy, but Dana also said, hey, no, we got to build that audience throughout the night. Tell me about this co-main event.
Yeah, I actually quite like the card, like you say, but when there's so much money going towards the main event, it does naturally get top heavy. But yeah, Callum Walsh, he's had such an interesting career. He had it was the first kind of UFC show that I saw, because to get a credential, you had to go into the UFC portal like you do for a UFC fight night or a pay-per-view, but this was for a boxing event. And that was when he went to Ireland and he won there, and everyone ended up throwing beer into the ring. And I think Tom Loeffler and Dana White might have gotten confused, thinking that was people protesting, but really it was like, let's have a beer shower. It was Irish people getting festive with how strong Callum looked that night. I've seen him in fights where he gets hit a lot. I don't think his defense is up to par yet, but he is a big guy for that weight. If you stand around him, he weighs in at 154, and he's like I'm sure he's around the 6 foot mark. I think he's taller than me, certainly bulkier. He's a big guy for that weight. Against Fernando Vargas, no disrespect to Fernando, he's not the most talented fighter in his own family. That's Emiliano right now. I think Emiliano is possibly the future of Top Rank if they can get a broadcast partner. He's like a Gervonta Davis, Oscar De La Hoya kind of pin-up type boxer where he can attract a different demographic into the sport, like Oscar did when he you looked around the arena and it was quite 50-50 with men and women. Emiliano is, one of the most improved fighters in boxing, but in Fernando, this is 2 undefeated guys, and it could determine, who's kind of the next challenger for going from prospect to contender to potentially a title challenger at 154. I think it's a really strong main event. I'm really looking forward to seeing who wins in that one.
All right, Danny, you have anything to finish up with our guest, Alan Dawson? And thanks, Alan, for doing this. Folks, you can follow him, by the way, get a quick follow on him as he continues here with the segment at Alan Dawson Sport. Danny Segura, what you got?
Yeah, I want to ask about Jake Paul and Gervonta Davis. One, like, how do you even, what are your feelings towards the fight? And two, like, who's paying for this? Who's watching? Because to me, it just, I'm not paying for it. I'll watch it for free. To me, it just kind of seems like a joke of a fight. Like, it's an exhibition bout. One's, many weight classes above the other. Is it even going to be an actual fight? It kind of just feels more of a pro wrestling stunt than it does a fight.
Yeah, I think you've got it spot on. I don't think, even if, it's going to be an exhibition, but it's not going to look, Jake Paul's done this before where we've got so much hype going towards that Mike Tyson show. And what we saw, like after the first round, it looked like it could be okay, but then it got quite sad to watch. And Jake Paul either couldn't or wouldn't pull the trigger. So I think we're going to see something similar to that again, where it's just going to look like 2 guys moving around the ring. As for people who would watch it, Jake Paul, he did seem to generate over 100 million, streams on Netflix when he fought Mike Tyson. And as for Gervonta Davis, outside of Canelo, he's the box office driver. He's a consistent guy who on his own can generate around 300,000 pay-per-views, which is in the modern market, that's good for boxing. I don't know what it would be like for UFC, but boxing would always take 300,000 sales if they're at that $80 mark in the US market. Tank did have one that broke 1 million. We mentioned it earlier with Ryan Garcia. So when you put, a traditional box office driver like Gervonta up against a big streaming driver like Jake Paul, it could generate an audience. I can see why they do it. It does. I think I seem to be on my own when I say I don't actually mind it. I don't think it really takes anything away from the sport. Gervonta's kind of got half a foot out of the sport anyway. He's kind of talked about retirement and having lost his edge. I think he's talked about having therapy and it's changed who he's been inside the ring. So, maybe this could be his last, quote unquote fight. It would be a shame if it did. I really think he should be fighting Shakur Stevenson. Hopefully we can still see that in 2026 because, that's such a big fight for, probably the New York market or East Coast, but that would be a huge, pay-per-view driver that I think the American sport certainly needs.
All right. Well, Alan, thank you so much for coming in here on Fight Week to talk about Canelo Alvarez versus Terrence Crawford. Folks, don't forget, Ghost and I will be doing a watch along starting at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. By the way, did you give it? Can you end it with a prediction, Alan? What are you leaning towards? I think I kind of heard more Crawford.
I think I've always had a slight edge towards Crawford. It just depends on how he can stand up to the body shots. But I think overall his skills at the moment are superior to Canelo's, who's been sliding. I've got to go with Crawford, I think. But I don't think it will be. Nobody's going to get knocked out. Famous last words, but I don't think this is going to end in a knockout. I think this is going to be, some skills that we're going to see over 12 rounds. And, unless there's no funny business on the scorecards, I think Crawford's going to take it home.
All right. Well, again, thank you for joining us here on Spinning Back Clique. I mistakenly said Junkie Radio, which is the other show that Goes and I host. But no, it's always great to have you jump on with us.
I appreciate you. I always appreciate the platform and joining you guys. You guys are great at what you do. Thanks again. See you soon.
Thank you, man. We'll see you. All right, there you go. There goes Alan Dawson. And back is Farah Hanoun, our international superstar reporter. Guys, let's talk about the upcoming UFC Noche card. I mean, listen, we got a little spoiled here with last year, right? This isn't a numbered event, no title fight or two. It's not at the Sphere. They're in San Antonio. You and I actually pulled off one of the greatest robberies in San Antonio, so we definitely will never forget the Alamo. But aside from the main event, you think this is going to be an unforgettable night?
Man, I'm excited for Noche. And what I mean by that is I'm excited for it to turn Noche so I can watch the boxing. The main event of Noche is great. But the card, I mean, it's not the worst card in the world. The problem is it doesn't match the Noche brand, what we were fed in the first one. Now, obviously, we're not going to transport a Sphere to San Antonio. I get that. But having it in Mexico was a good plan B. And when that didn't work, moving it to San Antonio is even a decent plan C. But the card itself just doesn't match the Noche brand. And that kind of hurts a little bit. So hopefully, you know, the UFC's done things like this before. And of course, they could still deliver good fights. But to have us excited going in, it's just not what it was before.
And on the heels of Paris, France, Fada, I mean, they had a proper main event with title implications. And how about that co-main event? BSD's big. He's French. Mauricio Ruffi, he's been doing good as well. Part of the Fighting Nerds. That's a 1-2 punch. I think the B minuses and C minuses should be given to this card because on paper, no disrespect to Rob Font, I think he's put in a lot of work in the UFC. He deserves it. But even when they were going with Raul Rosas Jr., something was lacking in the co-main. But what's your level of excitement for this one?
Yeah, not the highest, especially that it's not an early card either for me. So those I tend to be a little bit more judgmental on. The main event's great for sure, but card, awesome. Yeah, the card, just the implications, because I always look at implications of the fight or certain prospects and stuff. There's a lot more to look at than just, I guess, the names. But there isn't too much meat on this card overall. Yeah, Kelvin Gastelum's on there. Jared Gordon is solid, underrated. So is Rafa Garcia, is another underrated guy. Shout out to Rob Font for sticking on the card, but obviously that was a big loss when Raul Rosas Jr. had to withdraw. Alexander Hernandez staying active. I'm trying here, but Tatiana Suarez. I mean, we've Zhang Weili vacated her belt, so I think Tatiana Suarez, if she wins, she can get a title shot off of this. Granted, she's like a -460 favorite against Amanda Lemos, who hasn't looked the best in her past couple of outings. But yeah, not the greatest card, but you never know. But I'm not saying the fights can't deliver. It's just not the most exciting storylines.
What's your level of excitement, Danny, for Noche? Oh, I mean, I'm sorry, Noche UFC, because I saw so many Brazilian fighters. I thought it might be Noche UFC, but what are your thoughts?
Yeah, this is definitely the worst Noche UFC card from the 3 installments that they've put together. Obviously, the 2 previous ones being better than this one. And it is a little disappointing because when Dana White kind of rolled this out and I was there asking him about it in Mexico ahead of the first one, they really wanted to make a point of making this a special card and building it around the Mexican audience. And sorry if you guys hear there my dog coughing. He's a little sick, but anyways, in the background. But yeah, this card just doesn't. I mean, there are some decent names there, but overall, like that old guard of the Mexican fighters, those contenders, those former title challengers, former champions. I'm obviously talking about Brandon Moreno, Alexa Grasso, Irene Aldana, Jair Rodriguez. They're nowhere to be found on this card. And I know some are not fit to fight, this and that. But yeah, I think that's really taken away from this event. I will say though, because this is a misconception I've seen in the fan base, and I don't think it's entirely wrong, but yes, 2 Brazilians headlining the card, technically. But Diego Lopez has been living in Mexico for many, many years, continues to live there and has his own gym in Puebla, and obviously is responsible for the success of Lobo Gym and Irene and Alexa, helping her become champion. So he has a lot of appreciation for Mexico, and the Mexican fan base have a lot of appreciation for Diego Lopez. When the whole thing with Jair Rodriguez and Diego Lopez was happening, with Jair accusing him of being Brazilian and not Mexican, this and that, a lot of what I saw online was people getting the back of Diego Lopez and taking him as one of their own. So yes, technically it's 2 Brazilians, but Mexicans feel a deep sense of attachment and love for Diego Lopez.
Yeah, I remember all that. And you brought up Rodriguez's name, man. I think it was going to be him and Alexander Volkanovski was a rumor for Guadalajara.
The original plan, the UFC did try to make Diego Lopez versus Jair Rodriguez for this night, which would have been perfect. But Rodriguez was recovering from an injury and couldn't take the fight.
But he was anxious to fight Volk. I guess the title fight is probably where you maybe
you would fight
the dice a little bit more. But oh boy, goes. So is a title shot at stake? More specifically, if John Silva wins, because no disrespect to Diego Lopez, he just had one. But should John Silva do what he does, heavy hands, and get the job done? Are we talking about him on the next spinning back click the way we were talking about Nassourdine Imavov earlier?
Yeah, I mean, fresh matchup. I like it, and I do feel like this fight would happen, but I don't know. It all depends on the performance and how it happens too. But he's definitely somebody that would really, really get me salivating to see that type of fight. It's a different type of matchup that he brings.
What's your prediction, Goes? Have we turned in?
I haven't turned it in yet, but I think John Silva gets the job done. I like Lopez, but the problem is I feel like he's decent everywhere, but he doesn't stand out in one. The one thing is he never goes away. So if John Silva can't get it done early, he better have some sort of plan B because this dude does not go away.
Fada, how about you? Do you think this has title implications should John Silva win? And who do you think is going to win?
I do think he leapfrogs Lerone Murphy, who seems to be, unless they book Volk and Lerone Murphy for December. Unless they announce it. I mean, the Monster is the guy I think should be next in line, but I don't know. We haven't been hearing anything about him, and he withdrew from the Aaron Pico fight. I think it seemed like they wanted to rebook that. They didn't. So I don't know. Maybe he's not healthy. We haven't heard anything at all. But Mofsar is the guy, in my opinion, if we're talking about merit. But yeah, I do think if John Silva usually wins in impressive fashion. So I do think he would leapfrog Lerone Murphy. Like I said, unless within the next couple of, unless we get, but I think that's the whole point why they haven't announced Lerone, because Lerone, I've heard him do a lot of media and he's saying like he's waiting, he's ready, he's training, Volk wants it. But the fact that the UFC haven't told him anything makes me think that they're waiting for the Jean Silva and Diego Lopez fight. That being said, I'm picking Lopez. I think, I'm done doing this thing where I think I learned my lesson with BSD and Hoofy. Nothing to do with the fighting nerd specifically, but I think I'm done just writing people off right away. And then Lopez looked decent against Volkanovski. He's very dangerous as well. I know he works with Austin Bashi. I think he's going to try to implement the grappling because it seems like that's what you need to do against the fighting nerds. And his jiu-jitsu is super slick. That's something that he brings to the table that a lot of people who implement their grappling don't. We always thought about Brian Ortega and how he never really got the wrestling together, considering how good his jiu-jitsu is. With Diego Lopez, I'm interested to see if that's the kind of game plan he would implement, because if he does, I think he wins this fight because he's very dangerous on the feet too.
Danny, what's your early lean? Do you like anyone to win this fight? Because according to the chat, you hate everyone and everything non-Latino. So are you even interested?
I hate on Latinos as well. I don't discriminate. I hate on everybody. Look, I'm leading. I think this could be close to a 50-50. If you told me that John Silva knocks out Lopez or submits him, I'd believe you, and vice versa. But I am leaning towards Diego Lopez. I do think that he is the smarter fighter. Sometimes John Silva, for the purposes of entertainment, goes out there and gets a little crazy. And over 5 rounds, I think game planning is everything. Diego Lopez has been fighting way better opposition, obviously, with the champion himself, Volkanovski, Ortega, and other solid names. Even Movsar Evloev, although he lost that fight, he's been in there with tougher opposition. And ahead of this fight, he did go to Oklahoma and was there for several weeks, just strictly working on his wrestling. One of the things that he's told me is that he wants to get better at wrestling because he feels like he's been underutilizing his jiu-jitsu. His jiu-jitsu has usually come through opportunity, but he wants to make it now more intentional. So I think that's a good recipe, and that sounds good to me to beat John Silva. Again, very close fight. I can see it going either way, but I'm going to go with Diego Lopez in this one.
All right, yeah, no, fighter IQ is important, man. And John
Mhm.
Silva was goofing last time, but then he settled in and crushed. Goes another highlight from the fight night card.
Hold on. You're goofing. Give us your prediction.
Man, Fada made a good point about Lopez. Like he lost the title fight, but he, I'm not gonna forget everything he did before that. I've been saying I'm a Fighting Nerds fan, and I'm not saying they got fraud checked or anything like that. In fact, maybe those two losing inspires Jean Silva. But then Danny brought up a good point about Jean Silva. I think sometimes he gets consumed in what he's done, which is good. We're always telling fighters build brands and stuff, but hey, you got to win fights. Otherwise, you start to float off. I think I'm leaning now towards Diego Lopez. He's just got a longer case study against the higher competition.
GG jumped in bandwagon. He saw that 0-2 in Paris, and he's like, I'm out of here.
No, man.
He threw away the glasses.
No. I'm still a Fighting Nerds fan. Real quick, Goes, give me another highlight from Noche UFC for people to look forward to.
The best jab on Saturday will be in the UFC, and it'll be Rob Font. I think he puts on a good performance.
Ooh, okay, a little shot at boxing there. Alan Dawson wants to get back in. Fada, how about you? Another Noche UFC highlight or fight you want to highlight, or fighter?
I'm going to go with Tatiana Suarez just because I think there will be a lot of pressure on her. She's coming off of the loss in the title fight. Zhang Weili is no longer champion. She's a pretty heavy favorite here, and it's wide open, like with Mackenzie Dern and Verna Jandiroba fighting in October in Abu Dhabi for the belt. I think she could be next in line. And the Ultimate Fighter finale, which I didn't even realize was on this card. I'm sure Danny knew about that, right?
Oh, yeah. That's
but yeah, I didn't... I didn't even know that it was on this card, and I watched the show. I actually watched the show, but yeah, those are my suggestions.
Oh, you're the one watcher, okay. Danny, another highlight, please.
The Ultimate Fighter finale. I'm just kidding. I didn't even know until Farah reminded me, man. I just wish maybe we had a promoter pushing this rather than Crawford, Canelo, and letting us know what's happening this Saturday. Look, I'm gonna go with Alessandro Costa. He trains with Diego Lopez. He is a very skilled flyweight. Has been out for over a year due to a knee injury, which he had to get surgery on. And he's fighting against Alden Correa, who is coming in on short notice. The original opponent was Edgar Chaitis, who would have been a really fun fight. Yeah. I think Alessandro Costa has a lot of potential, and the flyweight division needs names. So curious to see how he bounces back from that injury.
I'll give Claudio Puelles some love, fellow Peruvian. He fights Joaquim Silva. A lot of Peru-Brazil matchups I've been seeing, but I've been watching a lot of MMA cards in Latin America as well. But you know what? That Jared Gordon, I feel like he just gets a bad rap. Like, he really is committed to his craft. He goes out there. People just like to punk him like he's a chump or whatever. I think this fight's going to be fun. So a little bit of love for him. I know he's wrapping up his career. He's 37 years of age, but man, a lot of things that he's overlooked. I think he's also gotten raw deals on a few decisions, but whatever. Check out Rafa Garcia and Jared Gordon. It's going to be a good one. Folks, listen, on the way out, you can always hit the like button. It's so easy, and it helps trigger the algorithm, and it helps us get out in front of more eyeballs. You can always share the show as well once it's done, right? So we would kindly appreciate that. And then this is where I tell you, hey, subscribe to the channel. You know how many interviews Fada and Goes and Danny are a part of, aside from pre and post fight, where we cover every event out there? And yes, some boxing. I know some of you, it's not your favorite love, but look, if you're going to criticize fighters for not having a crisp jab or a cross or, good movements, right, with their footwork, then that's why you watch boxing, because those are the masters at it, and it's a big boxing match. We do what we got to do here at MMA Junkie. All right, folks, we're out of here, though. We'll see you next week on SBC, 11 a.m. Eastern, 8 a.m. Pacific. That's our early time. And right now, check out the other stream that has just started for the UFC weigh-ins for Dana White Contender Series. We're out of here. Go out and be a champion.